And I don't think people think about or even know like how much waste when you just take a little bit of something, you still have all this other waste, which then, is the company composting it? Probably not.
What if the beauty industry's biggest sustainability claims are still mostly marketing?
Do you really need to source like 40 ingredients for a face cream? Like, not really.
So the real question becomes, can sustainability actually outperform traditional formulation?
Synthetic is not sustainable. Like this idea that like natural is sustainable. If you have niacinamide in every single moisturizer and your face mist and all of this, it can actually cause irritation.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Cosmetics. What if the beauty industry's biggest sustainability claims are still mostly marketing? Consumers are increasingly told that products are clean, green, or planet-friendly, but behind the scenes, formulators and founders face a much harder reality. Sustainable ingredients often cost more, sustainable packaging can complicate manufacturing, and the science behind many claims is still evolving. So the real question becomes, can sustainability actually outperform traditional formulation? And today we're unpacking that question with someone operating directly at that intersection. Today's guest is Kailey Bradt, the CEO of Sansi, a brand built around a deceptively simple idea that skincare should be effective, minimal, and aligned with both skin health and planetary health. Under her leadership, Sansi has focused on multifunctional formulations, barrier-supportive skincare, and transparent product design. Welcome to an episode of the podcast, Kaylee.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, and especially excited to talk about Sansi and sustainability and also your background. So to start off, for those that don't know, you are a chemical engineer. So your education is which, is not a typical path, right, for a beauty brand CEO. But would love to hear from you in terms of how that training influences how you evaluate product development and make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually went into chemical engineering because I felt like it was the best path forward to actually go into the cosmetic space, but really understand sustainability. So really from the beginning of my career, that was so important to make sure that I had this background where I could not only understand, but actually question, which I think is a huge part of being in this role, kind of like pushing back and asking the hard questions, which I really started doing almost 10 years ago now when I started thinking about launching my own brand. Mm-hmm. And back then, 2016, 2017, you could not get like a certificate of origin for a material very easily. You really had to kind of like, ask a lot of people. I would follow up at trade shows. It really started from there and started from, developing my own brand and having that background. And that's translated through every step of my career. So I'm really someone who, when I look at product development, obviously there's all of the traditional things you do when you're developing a product and you're looking at marketing and you're looking at customer insights. But I really take it one step further and I'm like, how far back can I go to the point of like, can I go harvest your feedstock material with you? So, and we're doing a lot of that at Sonsie as well. I think that's something that I'm really passionate about this year. I've brought it up a couple times at the end of last year, but I'm really focused on like that questioning and actually taking everyone with us behind the scenes and showing them how it's done. So I think it'll be kind of a radical movement in a way behind the scenes of beauty, because most brands have, investors and shareholders that don't want them sharing exactly where they're sourcing their material, let alone like how much of it they're using in a formula, right?
Yeah, so for sure. And, going in that line of thought when you're, when you're finding information out that maybe people aren't always asking. What do you find are some of the trade-offs that you face in terms of either performance, sustainability, to, again, going to like ingredient sourcing, where if maybe it's sourced in a very challenging part of the world that, is driving some socioeconomic issues. What have you had to, I guess, look at in terms of a technical angle when you're also developing products with such transparency?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing, of course, is like, I would say, like I said, when I started, it was so different. So trying to get the information was always a barrier because you couldn't even ask the right questions because you couldn't get those like more simple questions answered, right? And so I think now where we are in beauty is there's so much innovation on the biotech side that we can actually get a lot of what we want in terms of performance. When I was developing the shampoo for my hair care brand, I was looking for powdered surfactants. And it was quite limited back then. The origin material was a lot of petroleum derivatives, right? We were getting a lot of things, even if they were marketed as friendly, from the same source. It might have been a lower environmental footprint. It might have been like better green chemistry, but essentially the origin material was still coming from non-renewable sources. And so I noticed back then there was a lot of marketing of like, coconut oil derivatives and things like this, but it was only a fraction of it when you really dug into it. Yeah. And now, like fast forward, like I said, 10 years in the industry, there has been so much innovation where biotech companies have actually been able to do biomimicry. They've been able to actually reflect what's in nature through science. And so you're kind of getting the best of both worlds when it comes to the sourcing. And obviously, a lot of this biotech innovation is happening in the US, it's happening in Asia, it's happening in Europe. And it's actually been really great from the environmental perspective because you're not reliant on growing seasons necessarily. Some of these feedstocks are actually waste materials. So I know we had upcycled ingredients as a trend for a while, which is still great, but this is even better because you can do so much more with it, right? And I also find that like I really, as I look at new formulas, I'm really thinking about, to your point, like how much is this a risk to my supply chain, especially when you're looking at like single origin ingredients. So you really do need to consider that business, how long it's been around. Do they have investors and shareholders that we feel like will keep them alive or maybe even acquire them to keep them going? And, I think we saw this, for example, with the amorous squalane, right? Like everyone is still using this material. And of course, like we had squalane used to be sourced from shark skin. I know that was such a big story for them. But at the same time, we also had squalane sourced from olive, right? We could still get like a better squalane, but what they did was take it just one step further. And they were able to really have such a great reliant source of squalane that wasn't dependent on, is there olive waste or, and the consistency from batch to batch is actually much better quality, right? Even from the perspective of functionality, but also of color, of stability, etc. And so I'm really excited about that. Obviously, the biggest thing right now is cost. And the thing that I think is really important to, anyone listening to this right now is that we really have to come together as a community behind the scenes in beauty and invest in these better choices together so that it does drive down costs and become more accessible to smaller brands, to mass market brands that don't have the margin that prestige and luxury have, right? So I think all of these things are really important, but I do still see economics as the biggest factor. And especially when you're a brand that wants to focus on transparency, you want to know where things are coming from. You want to know where they're being processed. Like, you're going to get pushback from those companies that they're like, oh, you're too small. Like, we're not going to tell you, we're not even going to entertain this email, right? Like, it's just not worth our time and it's not worth our business. So it's really about company stages working together. It's really about working with the right vendors that you feel like are reliable enough, but not too big, and they will scale and they will be around. So yeah,
and I
absolutely.
love what you said about coming together as a community. So I was part of the founding team at Archaea, where we were,
Yep.
we wanted to use biotech to develop ingredients for personal care and cosmetics, and Jasmina Gonovic, the CEO, she had said, the thought of the business was that high tide raises all ships, right?
Yeah.
And so collectively, could we have an impact in providing these alternates, right? That maybe now are more costly, but
Yeah.
with broad adoption, the cost efficiency becomes better. And so I completely resonate with that and love that the
Yeah.
call to arms was made.
Well, I also think it's like how we used to market ingredients is so different. Like I remember seeing like this rose hip oil or something. It's like 1,000 rose petals makes
Yeah.
like one out. It's like, okay, that's not a good thing. That's actually really like wasteful, right? Like
Yeah.
what can we actually do to make this a better process? And I know Archaea was doing this. It's like there's there is so much that we can do if like enough people invest in it together to really move the industry forward. And I do feel like there's a great cohort of brands that have been around long enough, that were kind of in the beginning of the indie movement, that really do value these things. And
Yeah.
again, when we talk about like economic value versus like the value of human health and planetary health, like there shouldn't be trade-offs, right? Like we should be able to like check those boxes and then make the economics work within our margin. So I, again, like the more of these brands that can hop on that trend and do it together, then the better it becomes for everyone else as well.
For sure. And let's talk a little bit about Sansi and how you've positioned this. And we'll start actually with more of kind of the minimalist but efficacious that the brand is kind of centered around. So talk to me a little bit about what, minimalist but efficacious means.
Yeah. So I think we, as an industry, again, and this kind of came with like, you can't necessarily patent every formula. So you want to create these like ingredient lists that are longer, that are harder to copy, and all of this. And, I really feel like, first of all, it's such a complication to a supply chain, especially if you're a brand or just starting a brand. Like, do you really need to source like 40 ingredients for a face cream? Like, not really, right? Like we know that not really. And so I think those days, and I've actually never formulated that way, but I think those days are kind of behind us. There are brands that also have launched, or even Lipstick Lesbians just did Leaked Labs, right? They're literally just like showing you the behind the scenes. And that's something that similarly we've been developing at Sonsie, is kind of like this mini docu-series of like, how do you think about product development? How does this work? What are the first steps? What are these first conversations looking like? And really taking people with us. So a big thing that I really like to think about when it comes to Sonsie, and we have minimal efficacy, like you don't actually need a lot of those things to fundamentally make these formulas. So if you think about just like the most simple version of the formula, that's step A for us. Step B is, can we source those fundamental ingredients better? So that's where, of course, like we want to keep performance. We also, this idea of minimalist comes into our ethos when we think about like, are we minimally impacting the environment? Are we minimally irritating your skin, right? So many of our customers in our community as well, who we test these formulas with, they have very sensitive skin. They usually have some sort of skin rosacea, eczema, some sort of skin condition that's like negatively impacted them. And, they kind of get sent to like prescription, or, kind of like a derm, recommended product, but it's not pretty on their shelf and they want something more. And
a lot of times they, the derm recommended or, over the counter to even prescription based formulas are not optimized for sensorial.
No, of course. And it comes back to this whole experience. And so for us, that's really what it's about, right? Like if I could take those formulas that a derm would recommend and just make them cleaner, more simple. And again, cleaner is a big term, but that's another conversation. But you know what I mean? Really clean them up from the health perspective, but also from the environmental perspective. We can still have a really efficacious formula. And then the other thing we do that I felt was really important, and actually, when I've been advising the brand for a while, but when I stepped in more to take over their product development, I actually was like, hey, you guys, you know what would be really nice if we just told people the percent of actives we're using for these claims. And I think that's really important with certain ingredients as well, like niacinamide, right? Niacinamide is a phenomenal ingredient to so many amazing things, like smooth skin texture and help control oil and help even skin tone and brighten and all these beautiful things. But if you have niacinamide in every single moisturizer and your face mist and all of this, it can actually cause irritation. So people need to know how much niacinamide is in the product. And so it was really simple things for us that I just wanted to pull forward from the brand and really kind of set this precedent around, we're just going to tell you as much as we can. And again, I did the same thing with the fragrance. So I came in, the cleanser was the first product I developed from scratch for the brand. And, I was like, it's funny because if you look at the market, and you know this, right? The derm brands, they kind of smell clinical. The clean brands, some of them have no fragrance at all, which is great especially for sensitive skin. But then like these other brands, they're usually really heavy on the fragrance that are like more fun or playful. And so we kind of have two core demos at Sonsie. And this was actually really important for me to think about when I was developing my first product for them, which was, we have this demo that's kind of like aging out of the millennial brands. And those brands that they loved, like the Summer Fridays, right? They loved that brand, but like they don't want to buy a birthday cake lip gloss anymore.
I'm like raising my hand. I'm like, you're talking to me. I am that person.
Yes. And me too, and it's like, they don't, want so much color, and like, it would be nice to have this thing. And it's like, they're kind of aging out of those brands. So we had those people who were used to certain things being unscented, but still like a playful element. And then we have this other demo that, they've been using maybe their Estee Lauder serum for 20 years, and they just want something cleaner, maybe something that is a little more environmentally friendly, like they're more conscious about these things. And so we have people coming kind of from both phases of life. And those people that are coming from that section are so used to heavy fragrance. So to give them absolutely nothing as the first step of the routine felt like such a shock. I didn't want them to be like, where's the scent, And
surfactants can have like a innate smell to them that is usually, like for me, I'm like, that smells like a surfactant, but for a consumer, it'd be like a chemical odor, right?
Yes, of course. And so what we did with the cleanser, and then I also pulling this through, but the cleanser is a completely transparent formula when it comes to the fragrance. You can read all of the ingredients. It is actually a natural fragrance, so there are allergens present, but we put it at such a low amount. It's very subtle. It's a very like clean rose smell. There's only one allergen listed, and we did, RIPT on sensitive skin individuals. So we were able to get the safe for sensitive skin claim. No one had a negative reaction. And so I think that's just something that we're doing that's really different as a brand, that we're pushing the boundaries of. And I did the same thing we did a rhubarb lip balm.
Nice.
And we worked with an amazing lab, Lucent Laboratories, out of Canada.
Ashley's been on the show. Yep.
Yes. The best. I worked with her really early on when she was thinking about Lucent and developing it. And it's just so cool now, years later, to be able to like work with them as a partner. And so we actually worked with Lucent to do the rhubarb balm. And I was like, this is so fun because it is really important to our customers to just see what's in the product. And they're sick of seeing fragrance too, but I don't want to take that away. I just want to do it in a safer way for
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah. And fragrance, I think the consumer hesitation is right, that fragrance has always been that black box where it's just
Mhm.
fragrance. And so when you have compromised skin, let's say, or you have sensitivities, you can't discern if something is safe or not for you without that transparency. So I love that. And so
Yeah.
glad to hear you're working with Lucent, because that is also what
Yeah.
they stand for, is transparency.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so funny because I don't know if you ever heard about the Science of Beauty Collective, but it was this group I had helped founded back pretty much during COVID times. It was
Yeah.
like 2020. And I met a lot of people in this space that were kind of like Science of Beauty during that time through that group, which
Yeah.
was so amazing. And that's how Ashley and I first got connected. So ever since then, we've
Awesome.
been talking about fragrance for so many years. So
Yeah.
it's really
Well,
nice to see it like this in the market.
yes. Well, great to hear. When we talk about your product development and making decisions such as better for the environment,
Mhm.
um, how does that factor into the economics of product development?
Yeah. So I think for most brands, they kind of have a price point, a positioning of a product, all of these things. The nice thing about where Sansi sits particularly is that we're sitting in this space that's accessible luxury, right? So we have a little bit more margin to work with than prestige. And we also have some flexibility in pricing. Like luxury, you can kind of do anything, right? Like
Yeah.
sky's the limit. I don't
Yeah.
even know like how much people are charging for these creams anymore. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. And it's like my job to try everything. Right. And then I look
Yeah.
at it and I'm like, okay, not that cool. Like also where are the clinicals and like,
Yeah.
can that really penetrate the skin? And then, I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense, but like good for them.
Yeah.
So for us, it's really about kind of playing within a range. And so I go in, obviously, of course, like with any product, you're going to have a target price for the formula. You're going to have a target price for the entire bulk fill and assembly. You're going to have a target price for your packaging. And what really for us is great, like I said, we kind of have a range.
Yeah.
So for example, when developing the Adapt cream, it's this fun green cream. Again, I wanted to do something fun with the coloring,
Yeah.
because our packaging is so simple. But for this one in particular, from the beginning, and I think this is really important in product development, and I hope that more brands are developing packaging and product in parallel and not
Yeah.
as an afterthought, especially when it comes to new innovations in packaging, because much to consider, right? So like, for example, a lot of these green creams are in a jar or a pump. I knew from the beginning, if we could avoid a pump, that would be amazing. I
Yeah.
also had shared with the Sonsi team Shellworks. So it's a PHA material, super cool, really amazing innovation. Of course, there's a couple, I guess this was like 3 years. There were a couple of things that they were working on that weren't
Yeah.
out yet. So again, developing these relationships early and making sure that you're having these conversations so that at least it's in the pipeline, even if it wasn't the first thing, if development timelines didn't align
Yeah.
and we couldn't do it, it's okay. But I knew if we just put it in a jar to start with, we could eventually make our way to Shellworks jar. And like, thankfully that one worked out. But that face cream I originally had priced at $54.
Yeah.
And I didn't have pricing from Shellworks, right? Like they weren't fully ready to go with the jar when I first started having this conversation. So I didn't know where it was going to fall. And what ended up happening is we priced the face cream at $58. So we had to change like what we were initially thinking, but
Yeah.
for our customer, and again, like just working within a range, we knew it would be okay.
Yeah.
And again, it's like one of our best selling products now, which is really cool. But we also deliver, these aspects of multifunctionality and providing more value in that way. So we were able to do that as a brand. I don't think, even in the prestige category right now, you can always have that because prestige is, masstige is creeping up to prestige. Prestige really like can't go too much further because they're going to seem pricey. And so we were never positioned in the prestige category anyways. So it gave us a lot of room to play.
Yeah. And when you talk about cost, this is a conversation I have a lot with, helping brands with product development. And, I basically can break down the inputs for like a formula, packaging. But for the consumers, what do you think the biggest hidden cost is that consumers don't see?
I think it's actually like brand EDU. I feel like brands actually don't get to educate enough on these materials because there's kind of like the traditional marketing, right? That I don't want to say like sells really well, but we know performs, right?
Yeah.
And I think the brand EDU around product specifically is more of an afterthought. And then the cost comes in at the stage of the consumer when they're at the point of purchase, really understanding the value. So I think brands have to take into account this investment in product education.
Yeah.
And again, I also feel like this is a role that's really undervalued, especially nowadays when brands have been launching D2C, because traditionally with retail, you always had an education person in with the brand, right?
Yep.
And so that has really become like part of something I've had to do and I've had to take on with my background, which is totally fine because it's so cool because I get to have conversations like this, right?
Yeah.
But it's also not my primary job function. And I think a lot of brands, they outsource product developers, as we know. Like I started a product development and operations consulting agency, so I know that brands outsource that. I also know that a lot of brand founders and the people in the marketing seats don't necessarily understand what questions to ask. So if, again, I started in that position freelancing and starting to build out this roster of people that really valued sustainability and innovation. So we make sure they're asking those questions, and brands who came to us knew that as well. And so I think that's like, again, if you don't educate on the Shellworks packaging, people are just going to throw it away, which of course it breaks down over time, but you could compost it. You could put it in a compost bin, and that's really, really cool. And that actually helps, the life cycle and have a more positive outcome, right? Because then that soil can be reused, et cetera. And so I do think it's so much about investing in education as part of your product development process that you should consider. Like that should be a line item on your formulation development. It should be like also product education, like having those conversations with your team or bringing in someone to like really put together a comprehensive like guide on what you did correctly so you can communicate that to consumers.
And it's interesting because this was a concept that I even most recently learned about when, you're talking about marketing expenditure. Like, there are three basic areas that you want to touch upon, right? You want to inform. So there's that awareness of the brand, right? And then there's that like pre-purchase area that a consumer is in when you're in consideration, right? And then there's the third lever, which is the purchase. But they're, those aspects are equally important for your brand equity and then driving sales. And so it is an interesting part that sometimes I think, it's marketing can be very performative, right? Where you're just driving for that action of sales when there is a lot of value in the education portion of the, the Vivamer. I never pronounce that right.
Yeah. Vivamer. You can call it whatever you want. People know Shellworks. They're like, oh, I can spell that. So,
exactly.
But it's true, right? Like actually, I think another thing with like sustainability and marketing, there are things that are easy for people to understand. And that's kind of why we started communicating sustainability around packaging versus all the other things we're doing, because we know that there's like a perspective of performative marketing. Like it needs to be entertaining for people to sit and understand. And what I found is like even adding like, I don't know if you know the plug-in eco cart, like I had used it years ago with my brand, but essentially you can offset your carbon footprint. You pay extra at checkout and it goes to offsetting your carbon. And like we installed that on our site and over 25% of our customers are using it, which is really cool because they're kind of, putting their money where their mouth is. And I love that. Like, I love that that's a simple way to be like, hey, we're giving you the option if you want to. And then we know kind of like, okay, this segment of our customers, they're willing to pay that extra $3 or $4 just to do something better. And so that gives us confidence to continue investing in sustainability when it comes to our new product development as well.
Yeah. And what do you think, what sustainability myths do you think are out there in the industry right now?
Where do we start?
The biggest one.
The biggest one. I think this idea, oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to say this idea that maybe I have top two. Synthetic is not sustainable. Like this idea that like natural is sustainable. No, it's really tough. And I think it's really important for people to understand. And I think like that rose example, like going back to that, right? That's a really good one because, okay, you can pick a rose, you can pick the flower, right? Like the flower's probably going to get picked, but like, how much land do we need to consume?
Exactly. How much water?
Yes. Like how much time, resource, like just to develop an extract, right?
Yep.
Like, and I don't think people think about or even know like how much waste when you just take a little bit of something, you still have all this other waste, which then, is the company composting it? Yep. Probably not, they probably aren't. And so these are the questions that we really like to ask when we're sourcing these ingredients. And again, it's so much about your partners and what you can ask. But I think that whole myth that like synthetic is not natural, which means it's not like green or better for the environment. It's just so far off because there's beautiful green chemistry. Like again, the biotech industry is booming for good reason because you're getting best of both worlds. And like, yes, it's somewhat natural. Yes, it's somewhat synthetic, right? But like, we can't have these extreme like black and white views of these really complicated chemistries.
For sure. Yeah. And we had on a previous episode, Evan from Fairglow, who they're trying to kind of like democratize life cycle analysis. And so for those listening, life cycle analysis can really be your kind of guidance into decision making, right? Because if you took a naturally derived ingredient and you did cradle to grave, the potential for it to have a much worse either carbon emission, water emission, land use, or all of them versus its synthetic analog is the synthetic analog would have a much better outcome.
Yes. No, exactly. And I think again, like going back to the fundamental stages of like an LCA, right? Reasons why packaging and distribution as well have had such weight is because of this whole like weighted distribution of where the footprint is, right? So I think a lot of innovation was focused on packaging and focusing on distribution because those were the most obvious areas to tackle. And now we're kind of coming into formulation because all of these other areas have been solved for. So that's kind of where I think we are in why we're reaching this focus of ingredient innovation as well. And also just, again, the supply chain risk is so much lower, like using natural ingredients. And I really have for so many products, really pushed me more towards biotech because I was like, look at all these areas of opportunity. Like these things are out of season. This vendor shuts down for all of August because they're on vacation. Like there's a lot of things there. So
And maybe it is also like you mentioned, brand building, consumer education, where I'm sure you've encountered it, but being in the industry for now over 15 years, I have seen shortages of jojoba oil, of inulin, of betaine, things that are derived from what requires a good growing season, and so there have been these kind of times where it's been feast or famine, and you've had to figure it out, but consumers maybe didn't see that because it's not like a gas price, right? Where you change the price on a day and somebody, there's a war in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
It's your product remains the same price. It's just on the back end, we're scrambling, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I experienced this a lot during COVID because we, as like smaller indie brand sides, right? Like my brand that I had at that time, we didn't have the cash to buy all of our raw materials so far ahead. But all of the larger companies that were very liquid were able to invest in those raw materials. And so suddenly they were wiped off the market in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And I still see, yes, this happening with natural resources as well. And that's why I think there's really interesting companies like C16 and Savor and these type of companies that are innovating around fats and oils and a lot of these natural ingredients that we were sourcing. And so that's a big thing as I look at growing Sansi as well, is like, where can we make those really good decisions on formulas? Again, not overcomplicate them, but get those results we're looking for and know that we're going to be able to get that ingredient.
And before I ask my last question, you had a 2 and we got deep into 1 because I was like, yes, I agree with that. So what was your second sustainability myth?
So I'm saying these broadly. Like I said, synthetic is not necessarily not sustainable. Most of the time it's better, right? But also this idea that clean equals green. And I think it kind of follows the same trend as this natural. But this idea of clean, I think, has been really just jumbled up in this space.
For sure.
Because I really came in to the industry at the time when clean was cool, like clean was interesting, and people were really excited to try clean. It hadn't like let them down yet, right? Like that performance element.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of trouble, like I said, getting the information I needed. And then I started to question, like, okay, what is clean?
Sure.
And you know, Credo had set some standards. Obviously now Sephora has their clean program. Everyone kind of has their different version of clean. And I think you have to go to the brand to understand what that means to them. And notice that clean and sustainable and those pages, they're different pages for a reason, right? So I think that's really important. Like, yes, of course, there's some crossover as well. Like there are some clean ingredients that are also more sustainable, but it's this whole like clean, synthetic, natural, non-toxic, all these things are not interchangeable. And I think, again, with the brands and consumers are getting smarter too, like just go to the brand's website and see how they define it. And if you don't have a definition of what that is, ask the brand what they mean, because I think that's really important. Like they probably have a no list, right? And I kind of have like 2 sections of Sonsi's no list. I have the no list for the ingredients that we don't want to use for like health and safety reasons, which is kind of how I equate clean.
With a significant base of evidence as to why, right?
Exactly.
Like we don't use coal tar, you know, like
And then I have a no list that or I shouldn't even call it a no list. It's a preference list. And this preference list is actually related to the sustainable choices I make during development. So is there a biotech option that is available or being developed? And we could look at it with our timeline. If not, is there a renewable source, right? Plant, mineral, and what are the environmental impacts of these ingredients? Are they biodegradable? Is there a biodegradable version available? Again, so I kind of like work backwards from like, this is how I want to see it. And if not, what actually is our option? Is there an ingredient substitution, et cetera? And I try to be a good product developer by not being too micromanagey with my formulators. Like I like to make sure that I work with formulators that I know and trust as well. And they kind of know how my brain works. So they know what to present me with. But I think if you're going into this for the first time, or, you know, you're looking how to change your process, like I look at these clean and my sustainability preferences when I develop a product as 2 separate lists. And it's not something like I ever really talk about. It's something I developed on my own, but I did it because I think the same way that we translate that on the brand side and how we market it is actually different. Like clean is very, to me, like we don't use these ingredients. Sustainability has so much more complexity to it and takes so much more explanation. And that's really where I'm going to start showing more of like what we're doing at Sonsi on the sustainable ingredient selection side, because it is so different than clean.
Yeah. And, even for people listening, something that, when you were talking resonated with me was even looking at an SDS, right? When you can see things like it's a toxic to aquatic life with long lasting impacts, right? Maybe don't use that in your shampoo. Making those decisions based on the information available is actually easier now, as you mentioned, as comparison to 10 years ago. And so there are resources that brands can start to look to versus, well, what's that brand doing? Or what does this say, to actually have not only a standard, but a reason as to why they create
Yeah.
the standard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think on the consumer side, it's so confusing to them because there's so many different origin materials
Yeah.
for a single ingredient. I
Mm-hmm.
remember like developing my first shampoo and I was like, oh yeah, like we're doing a vegan formula. And they're like, oh, your xanthine gum isn't vegan. I'm like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, we can't go to market with that one. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
you have to get the vegan version because, there was a step in the fermentation
Ooh.
process that
Oh, yeah.
wasn't vegan. And you would never know because, like, what are you thinking? A xanthine gum isn't vegan? What do you mean?
I know,
It's
right?
like,
Yeah. Like the thought, I would never have thought that. That's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So I think and again, this comes with time and experience doing these silly things behind the scenes. Like, I spent too much time looking into xanthine gum after that, but I didn't really need to. Turns out you can just ask for the vegan
Yeah.
version. There's nothing silly going on there, but it's like these are things I've learned, and they're
Oh,
silly
sure.
things to
Yeah.
talk about. But now I know how to think about it, and just
Yes. Yeah. I think I would like to think I'm successful in my career and being in the industry, but that has only been the results of a series of mistakes that I've learned from, right?
yeah,
Like, you don't get somewhere and know as much as you know and know to check things unless you've
yeah.
been burned, right?
No, I always used to tell brands when I was like freelance doing advisory work and product development, I was like, trust me, I'll pay for myself in a month. Like, I will save you so much time and money. Like,
Yeah.
you don't even know. But it's like, I mean, really, it's a role that pays for itself. Like, hire a freelance product developer who really knows what they're doing, and like, you'll be more than thankful.
Yeah. Well, to close out our conversation, I'd love for you to opine on, for those listening, that either are from a brand or doing product development that want to switch to or look at sustainability. What are some of the things that you would advise to change first?
Yeah, I think really looking at, I mean, you have to look at the whole picture. I think being open minded to changing what you can first and
Yeah.
knowing what's like a short term and long term change is really important, especially if you're like entering into a brand that already exists. There's like a lot of reformulations happening right now with the new EU regulations, right? So a lot of brands are doing reforms. It's like, what can you change as an obvious thing? And then what is longer term
Sure.
and what's going to have the most impact, right, for the brand? Because I think also, um, there's a lot of short-sightedness when we're making sustainable decisions. I think in a lot of times it's like, oh, what can we do for marketing? It's like, no, what can we actually do that's going to have the most impact, that's going to be the most meaningful? Of course, tackle the low-hanging fruit,
Yeah.
but really like think about what's going to bring the most value and how can we storytell around it. I think these product development teams and consultants and anyone, the labs, like they need to merge with marketing more to
Yeah.
really understand what's important to consumers. What do consumers want to know? And like, what can those marketers and the people who are talking to the customers learn from just, you know, why, watching someone stir a beaker? I mean, it's not that interesting, right? But
Yeah.
what's happening and why is it different? And really just like bring these pieces together and work together on that. And just remember, whatever is going to provide the most value needs to have a story around it.
Sure.
Have to make it interesting.
Yeah. And I think adding to that, the kind of approach that you mentioned before of like, not being so black and white and like all or nothing, right? This was something when I worked with John Warner, who's the father of green chemistry, we often told the story about you'd show a synthetic pathway and you said, well, I replaced, this solvent here with water. And everyone would go, yeah, but you still have, this, and this in it. And it's like, yes, but I've made it one step cleaner. So,
Yeah.
so I think that incremental gain is also like a
Yeah.
mindset that brands can probably take into account, where it's like, yeah, you're not going to like scorch the earth for, this one ingredient to replace your hero ingredient, but you have some other things you could maybe change, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, there's simple things and there's things that sometimes I look at a brand and it's just like, yeah, I mean, add EcoCart to your website. That's a great option.
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't cost you anything. It's completely free, right? Like, it's like, oh, amazing. Okay. Like, I just did something, but I gave my customers an option to do something better,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and it shows that the brand, again, the brand doesn't make money on it. It's just shows that the brand does value that. And it's
Yeah.
just like one more way to make these subtle changes. And again, like products take time. So look what you can do around the product. And like I said, consider long-term impact as well.
Well, great. Thank you. Let's do a little plug. Where can everyone find Sansi skincare?
It's sansiskin.com. And on Instagram, we're also Sansi Skin. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for today's conversation.
thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for having me.